The keys felt heavier after the funeral. That was the stupid thought I kept having while I sat in my truck outside Daniel Price's house, staring at the brass keyring in my palm like it might explain how a man could be laughing with you in April and gone by October. There were 3 keys on it. One for the old lakeside cottage Daniel and I had bought when we were 26, and 2 broke to have good judgment. One for the detached garage where we rebuilt a 1968 Mustang that still didn't run unless you threatened it, and one tiny silver key I didn't recognize. I was 34 years old, a high school history teacher, and I had spent the last 6 months pretending I was handling my best friend's illness better than I was. I graded papers, I paid bills, I answered texts with thumbs up emojis like a coward. And after Daniel died, I did what I always did when something hurt too much. I made myself useful. So I came to drop off his keys. That was all. I told myself I would hand them to his widow, say something respectful, maybe carry in a casserole from some neighbor if one appeared, and leave before either of us had to stand in the awful silence where Daniel should have been. The porch light was on even though it was only late afternoon. Rain clung to the gutters in silver threads. The front yard still had Daniel's crooked bird feeder, the one he insisted cardinals preferred because birds respect bad carpentry. I almost laughed. Then the door opened before I knocked. Rachel Price stood there in a charcoal sweater, hair pulled back loosely, her eyes tired in a way makeup couldn't touch. She was 32, a hospice nurse, which meant she had known exactly what was coming and still somehow looked shocked it had arrived. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. I had seen Rachel plenty of times over the years, barbecues, lake weekends, hospital rooms, but grief changed the shape of a person. It stripped away the noise. She looked smaller and stronger at the same time, like a candle refusing to go out in a draft. I held up the keys. I brought these. Her eyes dropped to my hand. Then she looked back at me and something moved across her face. Not surprise. Recognition. He said you'd come, she said softly. Stay. I actually glanced behind me, like Daniel might be standing on the steps, grinning at the setup. Sorry? Rachel opened the door wider. Daniel said you'd show up with the keys and try to leave before I could offer you coffee. That sounds unfairly accurate. He also said you'd make one joke badly, then pretend you had somewhere else to be. I lowered my hand. In my defense, I do have somewhere else to be. Where? I looked toward my truck. Rachel followed my gaze. Your truck doesn't count as a social engagement, Grant. There it was. The first almost smile I'd seen from her since the service. My name sounded strange in her voice that day. Familiar, but newly personal. Like we had been orbiting the same man for years and had only just noticed each other across the empty space he left behind. I wasn't planning to intrude, I said. You're not. Rachel? Grant. Her voice softened but didn't break. He asked me to ask you. The rain ticked against the porch roof. I should have handed her the keys and stepped back. That would have been clean, respectful, safe. Instead, I stood there like an idiot with wet shoulders and a heart I hadn't let myself feel in months. He asked you to ask me to stay? She nodded. Not forever, just tonight. That sounds like Daniel being dramatic. He was dying. He earned dramatic. That got me. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it, rough and useless. Rachel's mouth curved faintly, and for a second, the house behind her didn't look like a place of mourning. It looked like a place where Daniel had once burned toast, played music too loud, kissed his wife in the kitchen, and called me over because he needed help moving furniture he had already moved. Rachel stepped aside. The inside of the house smelled like coffee, lemon cleaner, and lilies from the funeral. Too many lilies. There were sympathy cards on the entry table. A pair of Daniel's running shoes sat near the stairs, laces still knotted the way he left them. I walked in and immediately regretted breathing. Rachel noticed. She closed the door gently, then took the keys from my palm. Her fingers brushed mine, cold, steady, and the contact landed harder than it should have. Not romantic exactly, not then, but human. Warm in the middle of a day that had made everything feel numb. You ate today? She asked. I had gas station coffee. So no. Coffee is a food group if you're committed. Daniel said you'd say that too. I frowned. How much did he say about me? Rachel turned toward the kitchen. Enough that I'm concerned about your diet and your emotional avoidance. That man betrayed me on his deathbed. He loved you on his deathbed. The words stopped me in the hallway. Rachel stopped too, her back to me for a moment. When she turned, her eyes were wet but clear. He worried about you, she said. More than you knew. I wanted to argue. Daniel had a wife, cancer, medical bills, pain, fear. He had no business worrying about whether I was eating dinner alone over the sink. But that was Daniel. The kitchen was warm. A pot of soup sat on the stove, untouched. 2 bowls were already on the table. 2. I looked at them. Rachel caught me looking and gave a small shrug. He was very confident. Or bossy. That too. I should say this carefully because grief can make people mistake any tenderness for something it isn't. Rachel was beautiful, yes. She had always been beautiful in a quiet, clear-eyed way that made Daniel puff up whenever she entered a room. But sitting across from her at that kitchen table, I wasn't thinking about beauty the way a man thinks about a woman across a bar. I was thinking that she was the only person in the world who knew exactly which laugh was missing. And when she slid a bowl toward me, her hand lingered near mine just long enough that neither of us could pretend we hadn't noticed. "Eat," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am, I'm grieving, not 80. I looked up. There it was again. That almost smile. And because Daniel wasn't there to take up all the air with his ridiculous stories, Rachel and I had to fill the room ourselves. At first we talked about the funeral, then about the cottage, the dock that leaned left, the raccoon Daniel swore was personally targeting him, the Mustang that had spent 8 years in a garage waiting for a Saturday neither of us ever seemed to have. "He wanted you to keep working on it," Rachel said. I stared into my soup. "I don't know if I can." "He knew you'd say that. Apparently your husband spent his final months writing a Grant user manual." Rachel laughed then. A real laugh, quick and surprised, and it changed her whole face. I felt something in my chest loosen. Then I felt guilty for feeling it. Rachel saw that too. "Don't do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Punish yourself for breathing." I couldn't answer. She reached across the corner of the table and touched my wrist. Not to comfort me like a nurse, not like a widow accepting help. Just one person asking another not to disappear. The room went still. For the first time all day, I didn't want to run. Then the grandfather clock in the living room chimed 6, and Rachel pulled her hand back slowly as if remembering the same thing I was remembering. Daniel, her husband, my best friend, the man whose keys sat between us. "I should go," I said, though I didn't stand. Rachel looked toward the hallway. "If you do, I'm supposed to give you something." "Supposed to?" She got up and opened the drawer beneath the phone charger. From it, she took a small sealed envelope with Daniel's handwriting across the front. My throat tightened before I even read it. "Grant, only if he tries to leave." I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. Rachel held it out, but she didn't push it into my hand. "You don't have to read it here." Daniel's handwriting slanted across the paper, impatient even in ink. He had always written like he was late for something better. I took it. The flap opened too easily. He must have sealed it near the end when his hands were still steady enough to write but not strong enough to fix the old Mustang or cast a line off our dock. Inside was one page. "Grant, if you are reading this, you tried to leave. Idiot." I laughed once, and it broke in the middle. Rachel lowered herself back into her chair but didn't look at the letter. She gave me the privacy of pretending not to watch me fall apart. I kept reading. "I know you. You think grief is a room you can lock yourself in until it gets bored and leaves. It won't. It will eat the furniture and start on you next. Rachel knows about the cottage, the car, the way you stopped coming by near the end because you thought I didn't notice you crying in the hospital parking lot. I noticed. I'm not mad. I was scared too. Do me one favor and don't make it noble. Stay for dinner, then come back next week. Help her with the gutters if she asks. Let her feed you if she insists. Let somebody see you. This isn't me matchmaking before you get weird. She is my wife. You are my brother. I am asking the 2 people I love most to not vanish into separate corners of the same pain. And if you ever start that Mustang without me, you better say something insulting first so I know I'm included. Stay tonight. D. By the time I finished, the words had blurred. I folded the letter carefully because it felt like touching Daniel's shoulder one last time. Rachel was looking down at her hands. He made me promise, she said, not to chase you, just open the door. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand. He always did hate when I left a party early. He said you called it protecting your peace when really you just hated saying goodbye. That sounds like slander from a dead man. It sounded like love when he said it. We sat there in the quiet kitchen with soup cooling between us. Then I said, I can stay tonight. Rachel's eyes lifted to mine. Not relief exactly. Something softer, like a held breath finally released. I changed the sheets in the guest room, she said. Confident. Prepared. There's a difference? Prepared has clean towels. I nodded, but neither of us moved. The clock ticked. Rain scratched at the windows. Her sweater had slipped off one shoulder slightly, revealing the pale line of her collarbone, and I hated myself for noticing anything so ordinary and intimate. Then she reached across the table and took Daniel's letter from where I had placed it. For one wild second, I thought she was going to read it. Instead, she folded it once more and handed it back. Keep it. He wrote it for you. Our fingers touched again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Her skin was warm now. Mine wasn't. Grant, she whispered. Yeah? I don't know how to do this. Grieve? Be in this house without him. Her voice thinned. Make coffee for one. Sleep while his shoes are still by the stairs. Hear a car outside and for half a second think. She stopped. I covered her hand with mine. It was not a move. It was not a promise. It was not anything except the truth of that moment. I couldn't let her be alone on one side of the table while I sat untouched on the other. I still reached for my phone to text him, I said. Today, after the service, I saw a guy in a terrible baseball cap and thought, Daniel needs to see this idiot. Rachel gave a watery laugh. He loved terrible hats. He owned 3. He owned 6. I hid half. That explains the missing fishing cap. I burned that one. I looked at her, scandalized. Rachel Price. It had mold. It had history. It had moldy history. Her laugh came again, and mine followed it, both of us sounding guilty and grateful and a little broken. Her thumb shifted under my palm, a small movement that brushed the inside of my wrist. The touch changed the air. Not into romance? Not yet. Into awareness. We were 2 people sitting too close to a fire neither of us had meant to light. I let go first, gently. She noticed. Of course she noticed. But she didn't look hurt. If anything, she looked like she respected me for it. I'm going to make tea, she said. I thought you already fed me soup. Daniel said you'd need hydration too. I'm beginning to feel managed. You are. By a dead man and a nurse, I never stood a chance. That night, I slept badly in the guest room. Daniel's old college sweatshirt hung over the chair. I knew it was his because the cuff had a bleach stain from when we tried to professionally refinish the cottage deck and nearly poisoned ourselves with fumes. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Rachel crying, not loudly. That was worse. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, arguing with every version of myself. Then I knocked softly on her bedroom doorframe, which was open an inch. Rachel? The crying stopped. I'm sorry, did I wake you? No. A lie. Do you want company? A long silence. Then, yes. I stepped in, but stayed by the door. She was sitting on the floor beside the bed in pajama pants and Daniel's robe, surrounded by a half-open cardboard box. Photos spilled across the carpet. I thought I could put some away, she said. That was ambitious. I sat on the floor across from her, leaving space. She picked up a photo and handed it to me. Daniel at the lake, sunburned and triumphant, holding a fish barely bigger than his hand. He told me that was a bass, she said. It was technically a minnow with confidence. She leaned back against the bed, and after a minute, I did too. Shoulder to shoulder, not quite touching. We went through pictures until the crying eased into stories. At some point, her head tipped sideways and rested against my shoulder. Every muscle in my body went still. "You okay?" I asked. "No," she murmured, "but don't move." So I didn't. Her hair smelled like lavender shampoo and rain. I stared at the photo in my hand until I couldn't see it anymore. "I miss him," she said. "Me too." "I'm glad you came." I swallowed. "Me too." That was the first time I chose to stay without Daniel asking me to. In the morning, Rachel made pancakes badly. I ate 4. "You don't have to lie," she said, watching me chew with heroic effort. "I'm not lying. I'm honoring the dead." Daniel hated my pancakes. Daniel lacked vision. They're burnt. They have texture. She shook her head, smiling into her coffee. I looked at her across the small kitchen table, hair messy, eyes swollen, wearing grief like an oversized coat. And beneath it, there she was, sharp, warm, stubbornly alive. Something in me reached toward that aliveness. I didn't touch it. I didn't name it. But before I left for work, I paused at the door and said, "I can come by Thursday. Check the gutters." Rachel leaned against the hallway wall. "Daniel said you would offer." "I'm not doing it because he said so." Her expression softened. "Good," she said. "Then I'll make dinner." "Are you threatening me with pancakes again?" "Come Thursday and find out." For the first time since Daniel got sick, I looked forward to something. Thursday became a habit. At first, it had excuses. The gutters were packed with wet leaves. The porch step needed tightening. The kitchen faucet coughed like an old man. Rachel would text a photo of some minor household disaster with a caption like, "Is this supposed to smoke?" And I would show up with a toolbox and pretend my chest didn't warm when I saw her name on my phone. By December, we stopped pretending the house needed me. I came on Thursdays because she cooked. She cooked because I came. Sometimes the food was good. Sometimes it was Rachel's pancakes in a different disguise. But she started setting 2 places without apology, and I stopped standing at the door like a man ready to flee. Daniel's shoes stayed by the stairs until the week before Christmas. I found Rachel sitting on the bottom step with them in her lap, fingers threaded through the laces. "I moved his coats," she said when I came in. "I boxed his hospital papers. I donated the unopened medical supplies, but these stupid shoes—" I set my toolbox down. She looked up at me. "I don't want them here forever." "Okay. And I don't want them gone." "Also okay." Her mouth trembled. "That is not helpful." "I'm a teacher. We specialize in vague emotional support and dry erase markers." She let out a broken little laugh, then pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. I sat beside her on the step, close enough that our knees touched. She didn't move away. After a minute, she leaned into me, not collapsing, not asking to be held, just choosing the contact. I put my arm around her shoulders. The first time I touched her like that, I felt Daniel everywhere, not accusing, present. Like the whole house was holding its breath to see whether I would treat what he loved with care. So I did. Rachel turned her face into my sweater and cried until her breath evened out. I kept my hand still on her shoulder and stared at the wall where Daniel had once hung a framed photo crooked and insisted the house was crooked, not the frame. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red. "I'm sorry." "Don't. I keep making you sit in my grief." I looked at the shoes in her lap. "You sit in mine too." That landed between us. Her gaze searched mine, and for once I let her see the truth. The nights I didn't sleep, the unopened texts from friends, the fact that Daniel had been right about the locked room and the eaten furniture. Rachel touched my jaw with 2 fingers, a light, startling gesture. "You look tired," she said. "So do you." "Very romantic, Grant." I froze. She did too. Then she laughed softly, not embarrassed exactly, testing the word in the air, romantic. It should have sent me running. Instead, it made the space between us feel charged and tender and impossible to ignore. I cleared my throat. I meant beautiful. Tired, but beautiful. Rachel's expression changed. Not dramatically. No music swelled. The world did not forgive us or condemn us. But her hand was still near my face, and her eyes dropped for 1 second to my mouth. Then she pulled back and looked at the shoes. "We should put them in the hall closet." "We can?" "Together?" "Yeah." So we did. It took less than a minute. It felt like crossing a country. After that, something shifted. Nothing happened. Not in the way people mean when they ask with raised eyebrows and cheap curiosity. I didn't kiss my dead best friend's wife beside his shoes. Rachel didn't ask me to, but on Thursdays she started waiting for me on the porch when weather allowed, wrapped in a blue scarf, hands around a mug. I started bringing coffee beans from the place downtown because she once mentioned Daniel bought terrible coffee, and she'd been too loyal to change brands while he was alive. "You're corrupting a widow," she said the first time I handed her the bag. "I'm improving national standards." "He would haunt you." "He already is. Mostly through your pancake recipes." She threw a dish towel at me and missed by a mile. In January, she asked if I would take her to the cottage. The lake house had been closed since September. Daniel and I bought it as a joke that turned into a mortgage. One bedroom, a sagging screened porch, and a dock that leaned like it was listening to gossip. The air smelled of cedar, dust, and cold water when I unlocked the door. Rachel stepped in behind me and went quiet. "He loved this place," she said. "He loved complaining about this place. That was how he loved things." I smiled. "Yeah." "We opened windows, shook out blankets, restarted the power. I built a fire because the heating system made a sound like trapped demons," and Rachel stood close beside me, rubbing her hands together. "You're sure you know what you're doing?" she asked. "I have made many fires." "Successful ones?" "Define successful." "Grant." "No structures lost." She laughed, and the sound filled the cottage better than heat. Later, we ate sandwiches on the floor in front of the fireplace because the table was covered in mouse droppings, and neither of us wanted to address it yet. Outside, the lake was gray and still. Inside, our shoulders brushed every time one of us reached for the chips. It was the closest thing to a date I had been on in years. Neither of us called it that. Rachel looked at the flames and said, "I need to tell you something ugly." I set my sandwich down. "Okay. Sometimes I get angry at him." "At Daniel?" She nodded, ashamed. "For leaving. Which is insane because he fought so hard. But I'll be pouring coffee and suddenly I'm furious that he isn't there to drink it badly and tell me it's great. That's not ugly. It feels ugly. It's love with nowhere to go." She looked at me then, and the fire reflected in her eyes. "What do you do with yours?" she asked. "My anger?" "Your love." The question went through me. I could have made a joke. The old me would have. The man Daniel warned her about would have stood up, checked the windows, invented a chore. Instead, I told her the truth. "I bring it here," I said. "To you, I think." Rachel's lips parted. I rushed to explain. "Not to replace him. Not because I think... I know." Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled when she reached for mine. I let her take it. We sat on the floor in the old cottage, fingers laced. Between us, Daniel's favorite lake outside the window, and his absence sitting gently in the room like a third chair pulled up to the fire. "I bring mine to you too," Rachel whispered. My thumb moved over her knuckles. It was such a small intimacy. No one would have called it a betrayal from the outside, but from inside my skin, it felt enormous. I looked at her hand in mine. "Rachel, if this ever starts to feel wrong..." "It doesn't." I met her eyes. She swallowed. "It feels scary. It feels too soon, and not soon at all. It feels like I can breathe for 10 minutes, and then I feel guilty for breathing." "Me too." "I don't want you here because Daniel assigned you to me." "I'm not." "Good." Her grip tightened. "And I don't want to be a project you finish because you promised him." "You're not. What am I then?" The fire cracked. I should have had a careful answer, a decent one. Something with distance built into it. But her hand was warm in mine, and for the first time in months, I wanted a future badly enough to fear it. "You're Rachel," I said, "and I want to come back because you're here." Her eyes shone. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she had that first night. But this time it wasn't because the grief had knocked her down. This time, she chose the closeness. And I chose to stay in it. By March, people started noticing. Small towns have a talent for turning quiet into evidence. A neighbor saw my truck in Rachel's driveway 2 Thursdays in a row. Someone from Daniel's office spotted us buying paint together at the hardware store. One of my students' mothers gave me a look in the grocery aisle that made a bag of apples feel like contraband. Rachel noticed too. At first, she pretended not to. She had mastered that polite widow smile, soft, distant, impossible to argue with. But one Saturday, as we painted the cottage kitchen a pale green Daniel would have called aggressively vegetable, she set down her roller and said, "Mrs. Hanley asked if you were fixing my sink or my loneliness." I nearly dropped the paint tray. That woman still owes Daniel $12 from poker night. She said it with concern. She says everything with concern. It's how she gossips without sinning. Rachel smiled, but it didn't hold. She looked down at the green paint speckled across her wrist. "Does it bother you?" "What?" "That people wonder." I wanted to say no immediately, bravely. Instead, I leaned my roller against the counter and told her the truth. "Yes." Her face closed a little. I stepped closer. "Not because of you." "Grant?" "Because I hate that anyone could make something ugly out of this." I gestured between us, helplessly. "Out of Thursday dinners and burnt pancakes and you falling asleep during old movies but insisting you were resting your eyes. Out of me finally answering my phone again. Out of the fact that when I wake up now, I don't feel disappointed I made it through the night." Rachel went very still. The cottage was quiet except for the wind off the lake pressing at the windows. "I didn't know it was that bad," she whispered. "I didn't want you to." "You don't get to decide that for me." There was no anger in her voice. That made it worse. She crossed the room and stood close enough that I could see a streak of paint on her cheekbone. "Green, ridiculous, beautiful." "I don't need you polished," she said. "I don't need the version of you Daniel told to behave. He told me that a lot. I know, he told me because you never listened." I huffed a laugh. Rachel lifted her hand and touched the front of my shirt, just over my heart. Not dramatic, not claiming, just there. "I want the real man," she said. "The one who is sad and scared and makes terrible coffee when he's distracted. The one who looks at me like he's asking permission to hope." My breath caught. "Do I?" I asked. "Yes." "And do I have it?" Her eyes filled, but she smiled. "You have to stop asking Daniel first." That undid me, because I had been. Every time I looked at her too long, every time her hand found mine in the dark of a movie, every time I laughed and forgot to feel guilty for half a second, I had been turning inward, searching for a verdict from a man who wasn't there. I looked toward the window, at the gray lake beyond it. Then I looked back at Rachel. "I loved him," I said. "I know. I will always love him. So will I. And I love you." The words left me quietly. No thunder, no sweeping music, just a sentence that had been growing roots for months. Rachel's hand tightened in my shirt. She closed her eyes and a tear slipped down through the paint on her cheek. "I love you too," she said. "And I'm terrified." "Good, me too." That made her laugh and cry at the same time. I reached up slowly, giving her every chance to move away and brushed the tear from her cheek with my thumb. The paint smeared. She laughed harder. "You made it worse," she said. "I'm a history teacher, not an art restorer." "You're impossible." "You love me." Her smile trembled. "I do." The first kiss was not stolen, that mattered. Rachel rose onto her toes and I met her halfway. Her lips were soft and warm and shaking a little. Mine probably were too. It was a gentle kiss, careful at the edges, but it opened something in me that grief had not managed to kill. When we parted, she stayed close, forehead against mine. No guilt crashed down. Only sorrow, yes, always sorrow. But also relief. Like love had made room for love. Rachel touched my face. "We're not erasing him." "No." "We're not betraying him." "No." "We're alive." I swallowed. "Yeah." She kissed me again, shorter this time, and smiled against my mouth. "And you have paint in your hair." "Romance is dead." "Not dead, just poorly supervised." After that, we did not announce anything. We didn't need to, but we stopped pretending our hands found each other by accident. We walked at the lake with fingers laced. We cooked dinner at her house, and when she burned the garlic bread, I kissed the flour off her wrist and told her it added character. She rolled her eyes and kissed me back so quickly I forgot what I'd been saying. Still, grief had its own calendar. Daniel's birthday came in April. Rachel invited me over, then canceled, then called me from her car parked outside the cemetery because she couldn't make herself get out. I thought I could do this alone, she said. I'm coming. No. Her voice shook. Not to rescue me, I need to ask properly. I stopped with my keys in my hand. Will you come be with me? She asked. Because I want you there, not because Daniel told you to be. My throat tightened. Yes. At the cemetery, she stood beside the stone with a bouquet of yellow tulips. I brought a terrible baseball cap and set it on the grass. Rachel stared at it. Is that? He would have hated it. He would have worn it. Exactly. She slipped her hand into mine. For a while, neither of us spoke, then Rachel said, I'm in love with Grant. The air left my lungs. She was looking at Daniel's name, not at me. I think you knew I might be, someday. Or maybe you just knew we'd need each other and trusted us not to ruin it. Her fingers trembled in mine. I miss you. I love you, and I'm going to keep living. I could barely see. I cleared my throat. Hey, Dee, the Mustang still doesn't start. Rachel gave a wet laugh. And I love your wife, I said, voice breaking. I tried not to. Then I tried to do it properly. I hope that counts for something. The wind moved through the cemetery trees. Rachel leaned into my side. It counts, she whispered. Maybe she meant Daniel. Maybe she meant herself. Maybe by then those were no longer separate blessings. That evening we went back to her house and made Daniel's favorite meal, chili too spicy for reasonable adults. We opened one beer for him and left it on the porch rail. Rachel curled beside me on the swing under a blanket, her head on my shoulder, my arm around her waist. For the first time, I kissed her there, on that porch in the house where she had opened the door months ago and asked me to stay. She kissed me back without hesitation. And inside, on the entry table, the keys to the cottage and the garage rested in a small ceramic bowl, no longer feeling like something I had come to return. They felt like something Daniel had trusted me to carry forward. By summer, Rachel stopped calling the guest room the guest room. She didn't rename it for me, not at first. She only cleared one drawer, then half the closet. Then one Sunday morning, while I stood barefoot in her kitchen making coffee, she walked in wearing my old college shirt and said, Your socks are staging a coup in the laundry room. My socks are freedom fighters. They're fugitives, and they live here now, apparently. I turned from the counter. She was trying to sound casual, but her cheeks were pink. I crossed the kitchen slowly. Do I? Her smile softened. If you want to. There are questions that arrive dressed as jokes because they're too frightening to say plainly. I set the mug down and took her hands. I want to. Rachel looked at our joined hands like she still sometimes couldn't believe she was allowed to hold on to someone. Not instead of him, she whispered. No. Not because he asked. No. Because we choose it. I kissed her then, slow and certain, with morning light on the floor and coffee cooling behind us. Because we choose it, I said. Moving in was less romantic in practice. There were boxes, arguments about bookshelf space, and a tense 30 minutes when Rachel discovered I owned 4 nearly identical gray hoodies. No one needs this many sad sweatshirts, she said. They have different purposes. They have different levels of emotional damage. You're very judgmental for a woman who still owns Daniel's novelty Christmas apron? Her expression changed, just slightly. I regretted it immediately. Rachel! But she laughed. Not the careful laugh from the early days, a real one. The one that says, kiss the cook or call the fire department? That apron is legally evidence. She leaned against the closet door, smiling at me with that bright, brave tenderness I had fallen in love with piece by piece. We can keep it. Yeah, this house is allowed to remember him and still make room for you. I crossed to her and wrapped my arms around her. She pressed her face into my chest. For a long time, we just stood there in the bedroom that had once been hers and Daniel's, then only hers, and was slowly becoming ours without ever needing to stop being part of him. The Mustang started in August. That sentence does not capture the war it took to get there. It took 3 weekends, 2 wrong parts, 1 YouTube tutorial filmed by a man who should not have been trusted with wires, and Rachel sitting on an overturned bucket in the garage reading Daniel's old notes aloud like scripture. He wrote, "Grant will say the carburetor is fine. Do not believe him." I looked up from under the hood. "Your late husband is still bullying me." He also wrote, "Rachel, if he gets dramatic, feed him." I am not dramatic. She glanced at the grease on my face, the wrench in my hand, and the engine that had personally insulted me for 8 years. "You called the fuel pump a traitor. It knows what it did." When the engine finally turned over, it coughed, roared, and settled into a rough, glorious idle. Rachel screamed. I laughed so hard I had to grip the fender. Then I looked at the empty space beside me and said, "You hear that, Dee? It still sounds terrible." Rachel came around the car and slid her arms around my waist from behind. She rested her cheek between my shoulder blades. "He heard," she said. I covered her hands with mine. The garage smelled like oil, dust, old leather, and summer rain. Daniel's tools hung on the wall. Rachel's laughter was still in the air. My heart hurt and healed at the same time. That was grief, I learned. Not a wound that vanished, but a scar that could live under warm skin. We drove the Mustang to the cottage the next weekend. It was loud, unreliable, and absolutely perfect. Rachel wore sunglasses and tied a scarf over her hair like she was in an old movie. "You look ridiculous," I told her. "You look in love." I glanced over. She was smiling at the road ahead. "I am," I said. She reached across the bench seat and took my hand. At the cottage, we painted the dock rails, replaced the broken screen door, and hung a small wooden sign by the kitchen window. It read, "Bad Carpentry Welcome." Rachel had it made. I pretended not to cry. That night, we sat by the lake with a blanket around our shoulders. The sun dropped low, turning the water gold. Rachel leaned against me, her hand tucked under mine, the cottage glowing behind us. "I used to think moving on meant leaving him behind," she said. "Me too. What do you think? Now?" I looked at the dock Daniel and I had built badly, at the house he had loved loudly, at the woman beside me who had loved him first and loved me honestly. I think moving on means carrying him better. Rachel kissed my shoulder. That sounds like something a history teacher would say. It was profound. It was medium profound. You wound me. You'll survive, I'm keeping you around. I turned toward her. "Yeah?" She looked up at me, eyes warm, face open. "Yeah." I kissed her as the last light slid across the lake. A year after the funeral, Rachel and I went back to the cemetery with yellow tulips, one terrible baseball cap, and a photograph of the Mustang parked in front of the cottage. Rachel placed the flowers by Daniel's stone. I set the photo beside them. "We did it," I said. Car runs. Cottage still leans. Your wife still burns pancakes." Rachel elbowed me gently. "And your best friend still over-explains everything." "She knew that going in," I told Daniel. Rachel laughed, then grew quiet. She slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she whispered, not to me. The wind moved softly through the grass. Before we left, Rachel touched Daniel's name on the stone. "You were right," she said. "He came with the keys." I squeezed her hand. "And he stayed," she added. That evening, we returned to the cottage. The little silver key I hadn't recognized on Daniel's ring turned out to open the old cedar chest in the bedroom. Inside were photographs, fishing licenses, badly folded maps, and one final note in Daniel's handwriting. "For both of you, when you're ready. No instructions, no manipulation. Just trust." Rachel and I sat on the floor and went through the chest together. We laughed until we cried. We cried until we were tired. Then we carried the photographs to the mantel and placed one in the center. Daniel between us at the lake years ago, sunburned, grinning, arms thrown around both our shoulders. Rachel lit a fire. I stood behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist. She leaned back into me, her hands covering mine. Outside, the lake reflected the moon in a long silver path. Inside, the Mustang keys rested in the bowl by the door, the cottage keys beside them, and Rachel's wedding ring hung on a chain near her heart. Not hidden, not erased, simply honored. She turned in my arms and kissed me. It was not a beginning that forgot the past. It was life after. Two people still grieving, still laughing, still choosing breakfast and bad coffee and Thursday dinners that no longer needed an excuse. And somewhere in all of it, Daniel had kept his last promise. He had opened a door for me from beyond the grave. Rachel had asked me to stay, and I finally learned how. What would you have done if you came to return your late best friend's keys and his widow opened the door, saying he knew you'd come and asked you to stay? Have you ever experienced grief turning into an unexpected second chance at life or love? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.